The heat in the alleyway was suffocating, a localized inferno that tasted of burned sugar, ozone, and sulfur. Katsuki Bakugo was drowning. Not in water, but in a vile, sentient mass of sewage and malice. The sludge villain wrapped around him, forcing itself down his throat, into his nose, violating his lungs. Every instinct in Katsuki's body screamed at him to detonate, to blow this filth to kingdom come, but his explosions only fed the flames, trapping them in the narrow shopping district street. Through the stinging smoke and the blur of his own tears of rage, he told himself, not fear, Katsuki could see the pro-heroes. Death Arms was holding back the crowd, shouting about the lack of proper quirks for the situation. Kamui Woods was hesitating, his wooden limbs useless against the raging fires. Empty Lady was complaining about the narrow street. They were waiting. Waiting for someone else. Waiting for a better quirk. Cowards, Katsuki thought, his vision beginning to dim at the edges. I'm dying, and they're just watching. In the crowd, a skeletal man clutched his stomach, his fingers digging into his side where a hideous, spider-webbed scar rested beneath his oversized t-shirt. Tashinori Yagi, All Might, the symbol of peace, stood paralyzed. His time limit was up. The power of One for All was sputtering out like a dying ember. He felt pathetic. A fraud. He had chastised a quirkless boy on a rooftop just moments ago, telling him to be realistic, and now here he was, watching a young man with a brilliant quirk suffocate because he was too weak to act. Then, a blur of black school uniform and messy green hair broke the police line. Stop! Kid, get back here! Death Arms roared, but Izuku Midoriya was already moving. He didn't know why. His brain hadn't issued the command. His legs had simply propelled him forward. The paralyzing terror that had gripped his heart only a second ago was suddenly superseded by something entirely primal and undeniably pure. He saw Katsuki's eyes. The fierce, arrogant boy who had bullied him for a decade was looking at him with a silent, desperate plea. Izuku threw his yellow backpack with all his meager strength. The heavy zipper collided perfectly with the sludge villain's right eye, causing the monster to howl in pain and loosen its grip just enough for Katsuki to gasp for a lungful of oxygen. Deku? Katsuki coughed, his voice a mixture of shock and fury. What the hell are you doing here? Izuku clawed frantically at the sludge, his fingernails tearing on the concrete as he tried to pry the villain off his childhood friend. The sludge was like wet cement, immovable and suffocating. I don't know! Izuku cried out, tears streaming down his freckled face. He looked at Katsuki, giving him a trembling, watery smile. My legs moved on their own. You looked like you needed saving. For a fraction of a second, the world seemed to stop. Katsuki stared at the quirkless failure, the boy he had told to take a swan dive off a roof just hours prior. Tashinori Yagi stared at the boy who possessed the heart of a true hero, feeling his own spirit ignite in a rush of profound shame and newfound resolve. But reality is a cruel master, and bravery without power is often a tragedy waiting to unfold. You little brat! The sludge villain roared, recovering from the blow to his eye. The monster gathered its mass, pulling back a massive, hardened tendril of condensed filth. I'll kill you first. Izuku saw the attack coming. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he could not dodge it. He also knew that if he moved, the blow would strike Katsuki's unprotected head. There was no time to think. There was no time to regret. Izuku Midoriya stepped forward, squaring his shoulders, and threw his arms out wide to shield Katsuki. Crack! The sound echoed through the alleyway, silencing the roaring flames and the screaming crowd. It was a sickening, wet crunch of bone snapping under immense pressure. The sludge villain's tendril struck Izuku squarely in the chest with the force of a speeding freight train. Izuku's eyes widened, the breath violently expelled from his lungs in a spray of crimson. He didn't even have time to scream. The sheer kinetic force shattered his ribcage, driving bone fragments deep into his heart and lungs. His spine snapped under the torsion. He felt weightless for a moment. The sky above Mizurufu was a beautiful, hazy orange from the setting sun. Then, he felt nothing at all. Izuku collapsed like a rag doll, his body hitting the asphalt with a heavy, lifeless thud. He rolled once and came to a stop at Katsuki's feet. A rapidly expanding pool of dark red blood began to stain the concrete. No, Katsuki whispered, the sludge around his mouth momentarily forgotten. His crimson eyes dilated in absolute, primal horror. Deku? A blood-curdling roar shook the very foundations of the shopping district. All Might could not wait any longer. Blood tore from his mouth as he forced his broken, emaciated body to expand. Muscle and mass piled onto his frame in a split second. He launched himself forward, moving faster than the eye could track, leaving craters in his wake. Detroit. All Might bellowed, his voice filled with a grief and rage so profound it fractured the air itself. Smash! The fist connected with the sludge villain. The resulting shockwave was apocalyptic. The wind pressure extinguished the fires instantly, tearing the villain apart on a molecular level and scattering his fluid body across a 3-block radius. The sheer force of the punch created an updraft so powerful it gathered the clouds above, causing a sudden, torrential downpour of rain to wash over the shocked city. Katsuki fell to the ground, coughing and gagging, free from the villain's grasp. But he didn't look up at the towering, steam-emitting figure of All Might. He was staring at Izuku. Deku, Katsuki rasped, crawling over the wet pavement. He reached out a trembling hand, grabbing Izuku's shoulder. Hey! Nerd! Get up! Izuku's head lolled to the side. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the sky. They were glassy and dull, stripped of the vibrant, annoying, relentless hope that usually lived within them. Midoriya! Death Arms shouted, rushing forward alongside paramedics who had just broken through the crowd. All Might dropped to one knee, the steam rolling off his body as he reverted to his skeletal form, obscured from the crowd by the dust and the heroes forming a perimeter. He reached down with a trembling, blood-stained hand, checking the boy's pulse. Toshinori's heart shattered. He looked at Katsuki, his sunken blue eyes filled with an unspeakable sorrow. There was no pulse. We need a stretcher. Start compressions. A paramedic yelled, shoving past the heroes. They tore open Izuku's shredded uniform. The damage was catastrophic. Katsuki sat back on his heels, the rain mixing with the soot and tears on his face. The sounds of the sirens, the screaming crowd, the frantic shouts of the medical personnel, it all faded into a high-pitched ringing in his ears. He's dead. The thought crashed into Katsuki's mind like a physical blow. The quirkless loser. The boy who followed him around like a lost puppy. The boy he had bullied, burned, and belittled. He was dead. And he had died protecting him. Toshinori buried his face in his massive hands, the rain washing the blood from the knuckles that had arrived 2 seconds too late. I am sorry, the symbol of peace wept silently. I am so sorry. The morgue at Muzurifu General Hospital was cold, sterile, and perfectly quiet. Izuku Midoriya lay on a stainless steel table, covered by a crisp, white sheet. Outside the heavy double doors, a frantic, hysterical mother was being sedated by nurses, her wails of grief echoing down the linoleum hallways. But inside the room, there was only the hum of the refrigeration units. Until there wasn't. Space and time seemed to ripple, a subtle distortion in the fabric of reality. Out of the thin air, a small, floating mechanical construct materialized. It was no larger than a grapefruit, comprised of a glowing central eye surrounded by a segmented, geometric shell of pristine white and silver metal. It was a ghost. For centuries, it had wandered. Long ago, before the dawn of quirks, before humanity began to glow in the dark with genetic mutations, something ancient and divine had buried itself deep beneath the crust of Earth's moon. A great machine. The Traveler. It had entered a deep, dormant slumber, hiding from a primordial enemy. But as it slept, it had bled out fragments of its light, sparks of paracausal power, sending them down to Earth to find those worthy of wielding its divine mandate. The ghost spun its shell, its blue optics scanning the sterile room. It had searched the ruins of the old world, sifted through the battlefields of the dawn of quirks, and watched the rise of this strange, hero-obsessed society. It had scanned thousands of bodies. Soldiers, pro-heroes, vigilantes. But none of them were right. Their frequencies were off. Their motivations were clouded by ego, fame, or the rigid biology of their quirks. The ghost hovered over the steel table, pulling back the white sheet with a subtle manipulation of gravity. It looked upon the broken body of a 14-year-old boy. A blue beam of scanning light washed over Izuku's chest, illuminating the catastrophic internal damage. The ghost processed the data, but it wasn't looking at the biology. It was looking at the soul. It was looking at the final moments of the boy's life, echoing in the fabric of the universe. He had no power, the ghost realized, its mechanical core humming with sudden, profound awe. He was completely powerless, facing certain death, and he moved anyway. The speaker's ancient words, programmed into the ghost's very light, resonated in the silent room. Devotion inspires bravery. Bravery inspires sacrifice. Sacrifice leads to death. I've found you, the ghost whispered. Its voice was synthetic but deeply warm, carrying the timbre of a relieved scholar. After all this time, I've finally found you. The ghost floated directly over Izuku's chest. The silver segments of its shell detached from the center, spinning rapidly as a blinding, impossibly pure white light began to gather in its core. The temperature in the morgue spiked, the frost on the refrigeration units instantly melting. Eyes up, Guardian, the ghost commanded. A beam of concentrated, paracausal light shot downward, piercing Izuku's chest. It was not healing. It was recreation. The light ignored the laws of physics, biology, and time. It rewrote reality. Smashed ribs seamlessly knitted themselves back together. Punctured lungs inflated, the scar tissue dissolving into perfect, healthy cells. The severed spinal cord reattached, neurons firing with an explosive, electrical intensity. The blood that had pooled in his veins suddenly rushed, driven by the thunderous, resurrected beating of his heart. Underneath the sheet, arcs of bright, crackling blue electricity danced across Izuku's skin, a manifestation of the arc energy he was naturally attuned to. With a sudden, violent gasp, Izuku Midoriya's eyes shot open. He bolted upright, the sheet falling from his bare chest. He inhaled frantically, his lungs expanding as if tasting oxygen for the very first time. His hands flew to his throat, then to his chest, feeling the smooth, unblemished skin where he instinctively felt there should have been a cavernous wound. Breathe, a gentle voice said. Just breathe. You're okay. Izuku snapped his head toward the source of the sound. His wide, emerald eyes locked onto the floating mechanical eye. What? Izuku rasped. His throat felt dry and used. He looked down at his hands. They were his hands. Scared, slightly calloused. But they felt different. They hummed with a latent, thrumming power, like a coiled spring or a live wire. He looked around the room. The steel tables. The surgical tools. The distinct smell of antiseptic and death. Where am I? Izuku asked, his voice shaking. Then, a more terrifying realization washed over him, turning his blood to ice. He closed his eyes, searching his mind for the context of his existence. He found nothing. It was like staring into a dense, white fog. He knew the word for table. He knew how to speak Japanese. He knew the basic concepts of the world, cities, cars, sky, earth. But when he tried to grasp a name, a face, a memory of a childhood, there was only a terrifying, gaping void. Who am I? He whispered, panic rising in his chest. I don't remember anything. I don't know my name. The floating machine drifted closer, projecting a soothing, warm aura that seemed to calm the rising panic in Izuku's chest. You don't remember because you've been dead, the machine said gently. Izuku stared at it. Dead? Yes, it replied, its shell spinning slightly. My name is, well, I don't have a name yet. I am a ghost. Specifically, I am your ghost. I was created by the Traveler, a very long time ago, to find you. To find me? Izuku echoed, swinging his legs over the side of the steel table. His body felt light, powerful, yet entirely unfamiliar. Why? Because you were chosen. The universe is a vast, dark place, and it is full of things that wish to snuff out the light. You have been resurrected to wield that light. You are a guardian. The ghost bobbed in the air. I know this is overwhelming. The memory loss is a side effect of resurrection. You are a new person now, forged in light. But your core, your bravery, your instinct to protect, that remains. Izuku looked down at the metal table. Next to where he had been lying were his belongings, sealed in clear plastic evidence bags. a burned, ruined school uniform, a pair of oversized red shoes, and a yellow backpack, slightly charred. He reached out, his hand trembling, and picked up a notebook resting on top of the pile. The cover was singed, and there were dark, dried brown stains on it that Izuku vaguely recognized as blood. His blood. The title read, Hero Analysis for the Future No. 13. He opened it. The pages were filled with meticulous, frantic handwriting. Detailed sketches of people in costumes. Notes on their abilities, quirks. His brain supplied the word. He flipped to the inside cover. There was a student ID card clipped to the page. Aldera Junior High. Name, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya, he read aloud. The syllables felt strange on his tongue, yet they carried a distant, melancholic weight. Like an old song heard through a thick wall. Is that your name? The ghost asked, hovering over his shoulder to look at the card. It was, Izuku said softly. He traced his thumb over the smiling, freckled face in the ID photo. The boy in the picture looked so fragile. So timid. Izuku didn't feel timid. He felt a thrumming, electric energy beneath his skin, begging to be unleashed. I guess it still is. Izuku, the ghost tested the name. It suits you. Izuku looked at the little machine. You said you don't have a name? Ghosts are usually named by their guardians, it explained. I've been waiting a very long time for you. I can wait a little longer for a name. Izuku thought for a moment. He looked at the notebook in his hand, filled with dreams of saving people. He looked at his own unblemished chest, realizing that whatever had killed him had been severe. He had died, and this little machine had brought him back. It was his protector. His anchor in this new, terrifying existence. Aegis, Izuku said, the word coming to him with startling clarity. The ghost's optic widened slightly, its shell spinning in a rapid, joyful sequence. Aegis. The shield. The protector. I like it. I like it a lot, Izuku. Izuku managed a small, tentative smile. Okay, Aegis. You said I was dead. What happened to me? I don't know the exact details, Aegis admitted. When I found you, your body was broken. Massive blunt force trauma. You died protecting someone. That much was written in the resonance of your light when I found you. You made a sacrifice. Izuku closed his eyes. He tried to envision the sacrifice. He saw nothing, but he felt a phantom pressure in his chest, a ghost of the terror he must have felt. Yet, underneath it all, he felt an unshakable sense of rightness. Whoever he was, he had died doing what he believed in. We can't stay here, Aegis said, his tone shifting to something more urgent. There are people outside. Medical staff. Police. When they find out a dead boy is suddenly walking and talking, they are going to ask questions we don't have the answers to. Your resurrection, it's not a quirk. It's paracausal. It breaks the laws of this universe. We need to lay low until you understand what you are. Izuku nodded, his mind shifting into an analytical, tactical gear that surprised him. Right. Okay. He quickly tore open the evidence bags. He stripped off the hospital gown and pulled on the ruined remnants of his school uniform. The black gakurin was torn at the chest and stained with his own dried blood, but it would have to do. He slipped his feet into the red shoes. There's an address on this ID card, Izuku noted, pocketing the card. An apartment complex. That's a good place to start, Aegis said. The little ghost spun and suddenly dematerialized, turning into a stream of blue light that dissolved into Izuku's chest. Izuku gasped, stumbling back against the steel table. Aegis? I'm right here, Aegis's voice echoed directly inside Izuku's mind. I can reside in your backpack, so to speak. It keeps me safe, and lets us communicate telepathically. Try talking to me in your head, like this? Izuku thought. Perfect, Aegis replied cheerfully. Now let's find a way out of here. Preferably a window. Izuku walked toward the large, frosted glass window at the end of the morgue. He unlocked the latch and pushed it open. The cool night air of the city washed over him, smelling of rain and exhaust fumes. He looked down. They were on the 3rd floor. A 30-foot drop to the concrete alley below. Aegis, I don't know if I can survive that drop. You are a guardian, Izuku. Aegis's voice was brimming with confidence. Your bones are infused with light. your muscles are denser. You can fall from the top of this building and barely bruise your knees. Trust me. Jump. Taking a deep breath, Izuku stepped onto the windowsill. He looked down at the concrete. The old Izuku would have been paralyzed with fear. The new Izuku simply analyzed the trajectory, bent his knees, and pushed off. The wind rushed past his ears. He plummeted toward the ground, but as he neared the concrete, a subconscious instinct took over. A faint, crackling blue aura of arc energy flared around his boots. He hit the ground with a heavy thud, his knees bending to absorb the impact. The concrete beneath his red shoes cracked slightly, spiderwebbing outward. Izuku stood up, completely unharmed. He stared at his feet, then at his hands. Incredible, Izuku thought. That's just the beginning, Aegis promised. Now let's get you home. Navigating the city of Muzutafu at night was a surreal experience for Izuku. To anyone else, it was just a modern, bustling Japanese metropolis. But to Izuku, it felt like walking through a dream. He recognized the concepts, the neon signs, the convenience stores, the hum of traffic, but he had no emotional connection to any of it. He watched people walk by, some with regular features, others with distinct animalistic mutations or glowing skin. Quirks, Aegis commented in Izuku's mind as they walked down a quiet residential street. A fascinating biological anomaly. Over the last 2 centuries, humanity's DNA rapidly mutated. It's an evolutionary marvel, really. But it's purely biological. Bound by the laws of physics and thermodynamics. And I'm not? Izuku asked, pulling the collar of his ruined uniform up to hide the bloodstains from a passing pedestrian. No, Aegis replied. You wield the light. It is a paracausal force. It means you can dictate reality based on your will. When you summon fire, it won't be because you have a biological organ that produces combustible gas. It will be because you commanded the universe to burn, and it obeyed. Izuku stopped under a flickering street lamp, absorbing the weight of those words. He was a god walking among mortals. But he didn't feel like a god. He felt lost. He felt the phantom pain in his chest where he had been crushed. I died to save someone, Izuku thought, clutching the ID card in his pocket. That's what you said? I don't want to dictate reality. I just want to make sure nobody else has to die. That, Aegis said softly, is exactly why the light chose you. They continued their walk, following the street signs and the map Izuku had found at a bus stop, cross-referencing it with the address on his ID. After nearly an hour of walking, they arrived at an older, unremarkable apartment complex. Izuku stood in front of the door labeled Midoriya. His heart began to hammer in his chest. It was a terrifying, erratic rhythm. Why was he so scared? He had jumped out of a 3rd-story window without flinching, yet this wooden door terrified him. Aegis, I don't know who is behind this door. According to your records, you live with your mother. Inko Midoriya, a mother. Izuku swallowed hard. A mother who probably thought he was out late. Or worse. Izuku raised his hand and knocked 3 hesitant taps. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, he heard the shuffling of feet. The deadbolt clicked. The door slowly opened. Standing in the doorway was a short, plump woman with green hair that matched his own. She was wearing a worn cardigan, and her face was a portrait of utter, total devastation. Her eyes were swollen, red, and completely devoid of light. Tear tracks stained her cheeks. In her trembling hand she clutched a framed photograph of a much younger Izuku, smiling brightly. Inko Midoriya looked up. When her eyes met Izuku's, time stopped. The police had left 20 minutes ago. They had come to the door, hats in hand, and delivered the words that shattered her universe. Sludge villain. Unfortunate casualty. Brave but reckless. Instantaneous death. They had told her his body was at the hospital, waiting for her to come identify it when she was ready. Inko had lost her mind. She had screamed until her throat bled, tearing at her own hair, falling to the floor of the Genkin. Her baby. Her sweet, quirkless, heroic boy. He was gone. The world had finally crushed him, just as she had always feared it would. And now, he was standing in the doorway. He looked different. His uniform was torn, stained with terrifying amounts of dried blood. But his face, it was her Izuku. Yet, his posture was different. He didn't hunch his shoulders. He stood tall, broad, and his eyes, they were a deeper, more vibrant emerald, glowing with a faint, imperceptible light that seemed to pierce right through her. Izuku? Inko whispered, her voice cracking, sounding like dry leaves in the wind. Izuku looked at this woman. His brain searched frantically for a memory, a feeling, a connection. Nothing came. She was a stranger, but as he looked at her broken, weeping face, a profound, agonizing sorrow swelled in his chest. He didn't know her, but his soul recognized her pain. The instinct to comfort her, to protect her from whatever had caused those tears, flared violently within him. "Hello," Izuku said softly. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears. Calm, deep, steady. "Are you Inko?" Inko's breath hitched. The framed photograph slipped from her hand, shattering on the tile floor. She didn't notice. The world tilted violently on its axis. The shock of seeing her dead son, combined with the profound wrongness of him not calling her mom, overloaded her exhausted nervous system. Her eyes rolled back, and her knees buckled. Before gravity could pull her to the glass-strewn floor, Izuku moved. He didn't just step forward. He practically teleported, a blur of motion driven by arc-infused reflexes. He caught her gently in his arms, his strong hands supporting her weight effortlessly. He knelt on the floor of the Genkan, holding the unconscious woman. He looked down at her tear-stained face, then at the shattered photograph on the floor. It was a picture of him, holding an all-might action figure, beaming with unadulterated joy. "Your mother," Aegis whispered softly in his mind, materializing in the air beside him. The ghost looked at Inko with sympathy. "The police must have informed her of your death. Seeing you, it was too much." Izuku carefully picked Inko up, cradling her against his chest. He kicked off his red shoes, stepping over the broken glass, and carried her inside. The apartment was filled with artifacts of a life he didn't remember. Pro-hero posters plastered his bedroom walls. Notebooks stacked on a desk. A television playing a muted news broadcast, displaying a frantic scene of a fire in a shopping district. Izuku laid Inko down on the sofa in the living room, carefully resting her head on a pillow. He pulled a knitted blanket from the back of the couch and draped it over her. He stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by the ghosts of his past. He felt like an intruder in a dead boy's home. "I don't know how to be him, Aegis," Izuku whispered, the weight of his new reality finally pressing down on his broad shoulders. "I don't remember how to love her." Aegis floated over, resting his cool metal shell against Izuku's cheek. "You don't have to be the boy who died," Aegis said gently. "That boy gave his life so that another could live. He was a hero. But his watch has ended." Izuku looked down at his own hands, watching tiny sparks of blue electricity dance across his knuckles. "You are a guardian now," Aegis continued. "You don't need to remember how to love her the way you did. You only need to choose to protect her now. The light doesn't give you memories, Izuku. It gives you a second chance to fight for the things that matter." Izuku looked back at Inko. He saw the gray hairs at her temples. He saw the lines of worry etched into her face, likely put there by years of worrying about a quirkless boy who wanted to fight villains. He didn't remember her. But he knew, with absolute, causal certainty, that he would turn the world to ash before he let anyone hurt her ever again. Izuku clenched his fist, extinguishing the arc sparks. He walked into the kitchen, found a glass, and filled it with water, setting it on the coffee table for when she woke up. He didn't know how this world worked. He didn't know who this all-might person on the posters was. He didn't know the boy with explosive hands that he had apparently died for. But he knew how to be a shield. "All right, Aegis," Izuku murmured, sitting in an armchair across from his sleeping mother, his glowing emerald eyes locking onto the dark window overlooking the city of Mizurufu. "Teach me how to use the light. I have a feeling this world is going to need it." The morning after the sludge villain incident, Inko Midoriya woke up on her living room sofa with a pounding headache and a mouth that tasted like ash. For a few blissful, disorienting seconds, she didn't remember. She just stared at the knitted blanket draped over her, wondering why she wasn't in her bed. Then, the memories of the police officers at the door, the horrific news, and the shattered photograph in the Genkan all crashed into her mind like a falling building. She gasped, sitting up so fast the room spun. Izuku, I'm right here. Inko froze. She slowly turned her head toward the small dining table. Sitting there, bathed in the soft morning light filtering through the blinds, was her son. He was wearing a fresh white t-shirt and his favorite oversized sweatpants. He was reading through a stack of charred, water-damaged notebooks. He looked perfectly, impossibly healthy. The terrifying bloodstains were gone, though his old-school uniform was bundled in a garbage bag near the door. Inko didn't speak. She scrambled off the sofa, stumbling over her own feet, and fell to her knees beside his chair. She grabbed his face, her thumbs tracing his freckles, her frantic hands checking his arms, his chest, his shoulders. He was warm. He was solid. His heart was beating with a slow, powerful rhythm against her palm. "You're alive," she sobbed, burying her face in his chest, her arms wrapping around him with the desperate strength of a drowning woman. "They told me you were dead. The police, they said. Izuku sat perfectly still for a moment. In his mind, Aegis's voice was a soft, guiding hum. "Be gentle, guardian. Her reality has been fractured." Slowly, carefully, Izuku wrapped his arms around the weeping woman. It felt strange. Mechanically, he knew this was his mother. He knew he was supposed to love her. But emotionally, he was holding a stranger. Yet the deep, instinctual drive to comfort her, to be her shield against the pain, was overwhelming. "I'm here, Inko," Izuku said softly, the name slipping out before he could correct it. Inko pulled back, her tear-filled eyes wide with confusion. "Inko? Sweetie, why are you calling me?" Izuku looked down at the notebooks on the table, then back at her. He had spent the entire night formulating a story with Aegis. The truth, that he had genuinely died and been resurrected by a piece of ancient machine god technology, would either put him in a psychiatric ward or a government laboratory. "Mom," Izuku corrected himself, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. "Something happened to me yesterday. When the villain attacked. I think my quirk finally manifested." Inko's breath hitched. Your quirk? But the doctor said." "I know what the doctor said," Izuku interrupted gently. "But when I was hit, when I was dying, something inside me snapped. I healed. I survived. But," he swallowed hard, forcing himself to look into her desperate eyes. "It had a cost. The trauma, or the quirk itself, it erased my memories." Inko stared at him, the silence in the apartment stretching so tight it felt ready to snap. Your memories? You mean, I remember basic things. How to speak, how to read," Izuku explained, placing a hand over his heart, right where Aegis was silently resting within his light. "But I don't remember my childhood. I don't remember my friends. I don't remember you. Not really. I know you're my mother because the ID in my bag said so, and because of these notebooks." He pointed to the hero analysis for the future journals. Inko let out a wounded sound, covering her mouth with her hands. She looked at her son, at his broader posture, the confident set of his jaw, the strange, faint luminescence in his emerald eyes. This was her Izuku, but the timid, anxious boy who used to stutter and hide behind her legs was gone, replaced by someone entirely different. But he was alive. "It's okay," Inko wept, pulling him into another fierce hug. "It's okay. We can make new memories. You're alive. That's all that matters. My baby is alive." Izuku closed his eyes, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Did I do the right thing, Aegis?" he asked internally. "You protected her from a truth she is not equipped to handle," the ghost replied. "For a Titan, protection takes many forms." For the next 10 months, Izuku Midoriya lived a double life. To Inko, and to the doctors who examined him, he was a medical miracle. The official diagnosis was a hyperrare, trauma-induced awakening of a latent cellular regeneration and energy emission quirk, coupled with severe dissociative amnesia. The police apologized for their premature declaration of death, chalking it up to the chaos of the sludge villain incident, and the extreme physiological stress his body underwent before the quirk activated. He didn't go back to Aldera Junior High. The doctors recommended homeschooling while he adjusted to his memory loss. This suited Izuku perfectly. It gave him the time he needed to understand what he actually was. His first task had been relearning the boy who died. He read the hero analysis notebooks like military briefings. He learned about the pro-heroes of this era. He learned about All Might, the symbol of peace, whom the old Izuku had worshipped with religious fervor. He learned about Katsuki Bakugo, the boy with the explosion quirk. Reading the notes on Bakugo had been illuminating. The old Izuku had documented every burn, every insult, and every explosive attack with a terrifyingly objective eye, masking it under praise for Bakugo's combat prowess. This Bakugo person was a hostile, Izuku had noted to Aegis one night, looking at a page detailing the blast radius of Bakugo's right hook. He was a bully, Aegis corrected. The boy you were saw the best in him, despite the abuse. The boy I was lacked tactical self-preservation, Izuku replied dryly, closing the notebook. I don't hate Bakugo. I don't feel anything toward him, but if he tries to detonate explosives in my face again, I will break his jaw. With the past analyzed and categorized, Izuku moved on to his future. He needed a place to train. They found it at Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. It was an illegal dumping ground, piled high with rusted refrigerators, scrapped cars, and industrial waste. It was isolated, dangerous, and perfect. It was here, amidst the rust and the crashing waves, that the Titan was forged. The light is not a muscle, Izuku. It is a fundamental force of the universe, Aegis explained on their first day of training, floating above a rusted pickup truck. You are attuned to arc energy. It is the light of the storm. It binds complex matter together. To use arc is to become the storm. It requires no subtlety. It requires absolute conviction. Izuku stood on the sand, barefoot, wearing only gym shorts. He closed his eyes, reaching inward. He didn't search for a biological switch or a physical organ. He searched for a feeling. He thought about the desire to protect. He thought about the weight of a shield. Suddenly, the air around him grew sharp, smelling heavily of ozone. His veins illuminated through his skin, glowing with a blinding, crackling blue light. Sparks danced across his shoulders and cascaded down his arms. The sand beneath his feet began to fuse into glass from the sheer ambient heat. Yes! Aegis cheered. Now channel it. A Titan's body is their primary weapon. Focus the arc into your fist. Feel the kinetic energy build. Izuku reeled his right arm back. The blue lightning coalesced around his fist, forming a dense, blinding sphere of hypercompressed electrical plasma. He didn't just throw a punch, he stepped into it, driving the entirety of his mass forward. He struck the rusted pickup truck. There was a sound like a thunderclap. The shockwave blew the sand out in a 20-foot crater around him. The pickup truck didn't just dent. The entire chassis violently crumpled inward, the metal glowing white-hot at the point of impact before the truck was launched 50 feet into the air, landing in the ocean with a massive splash. Izuku stumbled back, staring at his smoking fist. There was no pain. No broken bones. Only the exhilarating rush of power. Striker, Aegis said, his optics spinning. That is your subclass. Close quarters. Devastating kinetic impacts. But you are not just a blunt instrument, Guardian. You can shape the light. Over the next 10 months, Dagoba Beach became his crucible. He learned to summon a towering barricade, a massive, shimmering wall of hard light that could stop a speeding truck dead in its tracks. He learned that his body was fundamentally different from normal humans. His bones felt like they were coated in steel. His stamina was practically limitless. Because he could not permanently die so long as Aegis lived, he pushed his body far past the biological limits of a normal human. If he tore a muscle, the light healed it denser. If he broke a bone testing his durability, Aegis knit it back together instantly. He became a weapon. By the end of the 10th month, the beach was completely cleared of trash. Izuku had punched, pulverized, and disintegrated thousands of tons of metal into dust and scrap, which the tide washed away. His physique had transformed. He was no longer the scrawny, frail boy from the ID photo. He was heavily muscled, standing with a rigid, military-like posture. His shoulders were broad, his back thick, and his eyes held the cold, calculating calmness of a seasoned soldier, warmed only by his intrinsic desire to do good. He had also learned to manifest a weapon. Guardians historically use firearms to channel their light, Aegis had explained. Concentrate. pull the weapon from the fabric of reality. It had taken weeks, but eventually Izuku had reached out and felt the grip of a gun manifest in his palm. It was a hand cannon. Heavy, metallic, with a glowing blue cylinder that hummed with arc energy. It fired not bullets, but condensed bolts of kinetic light that hit with the force of an artillery shell. He was ready. The morning of the UA High School entrance exam was crisp and clear. Izuku stood in the genkin of his apartment, slipping on a pair of dark combat boots he had bought. He wore a simple black t-shirt that hugged his muscular frame and dark cargo pants. "Are you sure you don't want me to walk you?" Inko asked, wringing her hands nervously. She looked at her son, still struggling to reconcile the timid boy she remembered with the stoic young man standing before her. "I'll be fine, Mom," Izuku said, offering her a small, reassuring smile. He picked up his gym bag, which contained his ID and a few water bottles. Aegis was safely tucked away in his internal backpack, connected to his mind. "I know the route. Just be careful, okay? Your quirk is so powerful, but please don't push yourself too hard." "I won't," he promised. The walk to UA was uneventful. As Izuku approached the massive gates of the legendary hero school, he analyzed his surroundings. Hundreds of teenagers were pouring in, chatting nervously, displaying minor physical mutations. "Assess the perimeter," Aegis whispered in his mind. "Multiple hostiles, no competitors," Izuku corrected himself. "Mostly physical enhancement, and emission types based on visual cues. No immediate threats." As he walked up the paved path toward the main building, a girl with brown hair and permanent blush on her cheeks tripped over a slightly uneven paving stone. She gasped, her arms windmilling as she fell forward. Before gravity could claim her, a blur of motion appeared at her side. Izuku caught her by the straps of her backpack, his arm rigid and immovable, suspending her an inch above the concrete. "Careful," Izuku said, his voice deep and steady. He pulled her upright, setting her back on her feet. Tripping before the exam wouldn't be an auspicious start. Achiko Uraraka blinked, her heart pounding, mostly from the scare, but also from the sudden proximity to a boy who looked like he was carved out of granite. She looked up into glowing emerald eyes and felt a strange, static tingle in the air around him, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. "Oh. Thank you," Uraraka stammered, her face turning as red as a tomato. "I guess my quirk would have caught me, but still. Good luck today." She scurried off, deeply flustered. Izuku watched her go, tilting his head slightly. "Her gravity shifted just before I caught her. Anti-gravity quirk." "Good observation," Aegis praised. "DKU." The roar tore through the courtyard, dripping with venom and absolute disbelief. Izuku turned slowly. Stomping up the path toward him, looking like he had seen a ghost, was Katsuki Bakugo. His spiky ash-blonde hair was practically bristling, and his crimson eyes were wide with a mixture of fury, confusion, and a deeply buried terror. Bakugo had seen Izuku die. He had felt the splash of Izuku's blood on his own skin. He had heard the horrific crunch of his bones. When the news had broken a week later that Izuku had miraculously survived due to a late quirk awakening and was suffering from amnesia, Bakugo had nearly destroyed his own bedroom in a fit of rage and guilt. He felt lied to. He felt mocked. "You!" Bakugo growled, marching right up into Izuku's personal space, grabbing the collar of his black t-shirt. "You faked it. You had a quirk this whole time, you worthless piece of shit, and you hid it to look down on me." Izuku looked down at the hand clutching his shirt. He didn't flinch. He didn't cower. The old Izuku would have been trembling, stammering apologies. The Titan simply felt annoyed. Izuku brought his hand up and grasped Bakugo's wrist. He didn't use arc. He didn't use his light. He just used his raw, light-dense physical strength. He squeezed, just enough to make the bones in Bakugo's forearm grind together in a terrifying warning. Bakugo grunted in pain, his eyes widening as his grip was forcibly broken and his arm shoved back down to his side. It was like trying to wrestle a steel beam. "My name is Midoriya," Izuku said smoothly, his face a mask of absolute calm. "If Deku is a nickname, I don't remember it. And I don't remember you. The doctors told me I suffered extreme trauma during a villain attack. If we were friends before, I apologize for forgetting you. But do not touch me aggressively again, or I will perceive you as a threat." Bakugo was paralyzed. He stared into Izuku's eyes, looking for the terrified, trembling nerd he had bullied his whole life. There was nothing. Just an endless, cold abyss of absolute confidence. You! Bakugo whispered, genuinely unnerved. Before he could ignite his palms, Izuku simply turned his back and walked into the building, leaving the explosive boy frozen on the pavement. Well handled, Aegis mused. No wasted energy. The written exam was trivial. Thanks to his complete read-through of his old notebooks and intensive homeschooling, Izuku aced it. The briefing auditorium, however, was where the real test began. Present Mike, the voice hero, stood at the podium, enthusiastically explaining the rules of the practical exam. 3 types of villain bots. Points assigned based on difficulty. A massive urban arena. It's a standard vanguard strike operation, Izuku thought, his eyes locked onto the screen displaying the robots. Eliminate enemy combatants, secure the zone, accrue points. Simple. Excuse me. A tall, blue-haired boy stood up, his posture impossibly rigid. Tenya Ida pointed a stiff hand at the podium. On the printout, there are 4 types of villains. If this is a misprint, UA, the most prominent academy in Japan, should be ashamed. Ida then whipped around, pointing directly at Izuku, who was sitting near the aisle. And you, with the dark clothes, you have been sitting perfectly still, analyzing the room like a predator. If you are here to intimidate the other applicants, leave immediately. The auditorium went dead silent. Everyone looked at Izuku. Izuku blinked. He didn't get angry. He evaluated the critique. My apologies, Izuku said aloud, his voice carrying clearly without a microphone. My posture is a habit. As for the 4th robot on the printout, Present Mike was likely about to explain it before he was interrupted. Let us allow the instructor to finish the briefing. Ida froze, his face flushing violently in embarrassment at the logical, calm reprimand. I see. My apologies. He bowed rigidly and sat down. Present Mike grinned. Thanks, listener. Like the calm dude said, the 4th bot is the 0-pointer. It's just an obstacle. If you see it, run. It's a massive gimmick. An obstacle, Aegis mused. Why put an obstacle in a combat trial unless it tests something other than combat? We'll find out, Izuku replied. Battle Center B was a sprawling, faux city block. High-rise buildings, narrow alleyways, and wide main streets. Izuku stood at the front of the massive crowd of applicants gathered before the towering gates. The other applicants were stretching, murmuring nervously, trying to hype themselves up. Uraraka was taking deep breaths nearby. Ida was doing calf stretches. Izuku just stood there, his arms resting at his sides, staring at the closed gates. Inside the observation room, the faculty of UA sat in front of a massive wall of monitors. An interesting crop this year, Midnight purred, crossing her legs. Indeed, Principal Niza said, sipping his tea. But I'm particularly interested in applicant Midoriya. The boy who supposedly died and came back with a quirk that defies conventional medical understanding. Eraserhead, Shota Aizawa, leaned forward in his sleeping bag, his tired eyes narrowing as he watched the monitor displaying Izuku. He doesn't look like a teenager. He looks like a soldier waiting for a dropship doors to open. Look at his breathing. He's completely calm. Start. Present Mick's voice suddenly blared over the loudspeakers. What are you waiting for? There are no countdowns in a real fight. Before the other applicants could even process the command, there was a deafening crack of thunder. The applicants flinched, covering their ears. When they looked up, a massive spiderweb crater of cracked asphalt marked where Izuku Midoriya had been standing. A trail of fading blue lightning hung in the air, leading straight into the heart of the city. He's fast! Ida yelled, finally sprinting after him. Izuku was already 3 blocks deep. He didn't run, he bounded, his powerful legs propelling him forward in massive, leaping strides. He rounded a corner and found himself face to face with a group of 5 1-pointer and 2-pointer robots. Target acquired! Aegis pinged in his mind, highlighting the robots' sensory arrays and joints. The robots turned their optical sensors toward him. Target lock. Izuku didn't break his stride. He reached out his right hand. A swirl of crackling blue, paracausal energy coalesced in his palm. In a fraction of a second, The energy solidified into the heavy, metallic frame of his arc hand cannon. He didn't aim down the sights. He trusted his muscle memory, and the light guiding his hand. Bang! 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 The hand cannon didn't sound like a gun. It sounded like a thunderstrike. 3 bolts of hyper-condensed kinetic arc energy tore through the air. They didn't just pierce the armor of the robots. The sheer kinetic force caused the machines to violently detonate, blowing their upper halves completely off in showers of sparks and shrapnel. 2 robots left. They launched a volley of rubber bullets at him. Izuku didn't dodge. He sprinted straight through the barrage. The bullets struck his chest and shoulders, but against his light-enhanced physiology, they felt like raindrops hitting a tank. He closed the distance in a blur. He dismissed the hand cannon, letting it dissolve back into light. He leaped into the air, his right knee coated in crackling electricity, and drove it directly into the chest plate of a 2-pointer. The machine folded in half, its chassis crumpling around his knee before exploding. He landed on the wreckage, spun on his heel, and caught the metal fist of the final 1-pointer that tried to hit him from behind. Izuku gripped the robot's arm, his eyes flashing with arc light. He violently yanked the machine forward, tearing its arm from its socket, and delivered a devastating, sparking left hook to its head. The head tore clean off, bouncing down the street like a tin can. 8 points, Aegis tallied calmly. 30 seconds elapsed. Move to the next sector. In the observation room, the teachers were stunned into silence. What kind of quirk is that? Snipe asked, leaning forward to get a better look at the screen. He materialized a firearm, shot energy projectiles, dismissed it, and then demonstrated strength on par with All Might's early days, all while emitting some kind of electrical aura. Multiple quirks? Midnight suggested, disturbed. No, Nisa said softly, his paw resting on his chin. His registry simply says energy manipulation and physical enhancement. But look at his movements. There is no wasted energy. No hesitation. He is fighting with the efficiency of a machine, yet with the fluidity of a master martial artist. All Might, sitting in his deflated, skeletal form in the back row, watched the screen with wide eyes. He remembered this boy. He remembered watching him die. He remembered the soul-crushing guilt. To see him now, moving like a demigod of lightning and thunder, it defied belief. Young Midoriya, All Might thought, his heart swelling with a strange mix of pride and fear. What did you become? By the 8-minute mark, Izuku had accrued 74 points. He wasn't even breathing heavily. He stood atop a pile of scrap 3-pointers in a plaza, surveying the area. The other applicants were starting to arrive in his sector, panting, sweating, and struggling to take down the remaining machines. Izuku watched them. He saw the laser naval boys struggling. He saw Ida kicking through bots. He saw Uraraka floating them into the air and dropping them. They are fighting as individuals, Izuku analyzed. No coordination. No fire teams. They are treating this as a competition, not a battlefield. It is an entrance exam, Izuku, Aegis reminded him. They are children, so am I, Izuku replied. Biologically, perhaps, Aegis countered. But your soul is forged in light. You are something else entirely. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. It started as a low vibration, rattling the shattered glass on the pavement. Then, it escalated into a violent, rhythmic earthquake. The tall faux buildings at the edge of the sector began to crumble, massive chunks of concrete falling to the street below. A shadow fell over the plaza. Rising from the dust and destruction was a machine the size of a skyscraper. It was a mechanical titan, its single, glowing red eye sweeping over the terrified applicants. Its massive treads crushed buildings like cardboard. The 0-pointer. Less than 2 minutes remaining. Present Mick's voice echoed. The applicants screamed. The bravado they had shown earlier vanished instantly in the face of insurmountable odds. They turned and ran. Izuku stood his ground. He analyzed the machine. Its armor was incredibly thick. A hand cannon shot wouldn't penetrate the main chassis. A standard punch would dent it, but wouldn't stop its forward momentum. Tactical retreat? Aegis asked. It's worth 0 points, agreed. There's no strategic value in engaging, Izuku thought, turning to follow the fleeing crowd. I'll help. Izuku froze. The cry was faint, barely cutting through the grinding of the zero-pointer's gears, but his light-enhanced hearing caught it. He turned back. Through the dust, near the treads of the advancing behemoth, he saw her. The gravity girl. Uraraka. Her leg was pinned under a massive slab of concrete that had fallen from a crushed building. She was frantically trying to push it off, but she was exhausted, and the zero-pointer was raising its massive, building-sized fist to crush the street in front of it. She was going to die. Just like that, the tactical, calculating soldier vanished. The deep, primordial instinct that had forced a quirkless boy to run into a blazing alleyway to save his bully flared violently in Izuku's chest. The memory of his death was gone, but the feeling of sacrifice remained, written into the very fabric of his light. Aegis, I know, the ghost replied, his synthetic voice laced with fierce pride. Time to fly, Guardian. Izuku dropped his stance. He didn't run. He dug his boots into the asphalt, crouching low. He reached into the deepest well of his light. He didn't just want to channel the arc, he wanted to become it. The air around him distorted, a localized vacuum forming as the heat spiked dramatically. The blue lightning surrounding him intensified from a faint crackle to a blinding, roaring tempest. In the observation room, the monitors tracking Izuku's vitals and energy output suddenly blared a shrill alarm, the graphs spiking completely off the charts. What is he doing? Aizawa yelled, standing up. He's going to get himself killed. Nizu, hit the kill switch for the zero-pointer. Nizu's paw hovered over the red button, his eyes wide. Wait. Look. Izuku took a deep breath, his lungs filling with ozone and power. Thunder crash. With an earth-shattering boom that shattered every remaining window in a 5-block radius, Izuku launched himself. He didn't jump. He flew. He became a human missile, wrapped in a comet tail of roaring blue electricity. The sheer kinetic force of his launch tore a trench through the asphalt behind him. He defied gravity, rocketing upward on a direct collision course with the zero-pointer's face. The other applicants stopped running, turning in pure shock as they watched a meteor of blue light streak across the sky. Izuku pulled his right fist back, the arc energy coalescing into a spearhead of absolute destruction. He collided with the center of the zero-pointer's face. For a microsecond, there was silence. Then, the machine's armor shattered. Izuku didn't just dent it. His body bored straight through the dense metal plating, the arc energy instantly melting the internal circuitry, support struts, and power cores. He traveled cleanly through the entire head of the robot, bursting out the back in a shower of molten slag and shattered metal. The impact triggered a catastrophic chain reaction. The zero-pointer's head exploded outward. A massive ring of blue static electricity pulsed outward from the point of impact, short-circuiting every remaining robot in the sector. The colossal machine froze, groaned, and began to tilt backward, falling away from Uraraka and crashing into the ruined cityscape with a localized earthquake that knocked half the applicants off their feet. High above the ruins, Izuku reached the apex of his flight. The arc energy dissipated, and gravity reclaimed him. He fell, dropping hundreds of feet toward the street below. He didn't panic. He adjusted his trajectory, bent his knees, and let a small flare of arc energy cushion his descent. He landed in a crouch directly in front of the trapped Uraraka, the concrete cracking slightly beneath his boots. He stood up, completely unscathed. No broken bones. No torn muscles. Not even a drop of sweat on his brow. He looked down at the terrified, awestruck girl. He reached down, gripped the massive concrete slab pinning her leg, and heaved it upward with one hand, tossing it aside as if it were made of styrofoam. Are you injured? Izuku asked, his voice calm, though the air around him still smelled heavily of ozone. Uraraka could only stare at him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She looked from him, to the burning, decapitated remains of the zero-pointer, and back to him. Tea time's up. President Mike screamed over the loudspeakers, his voice cracking violently. The siren blared, echoing over the silent, ruined battlefield. None of the applicants moved. They were all staring at the boy in the black shirt. In the observation room, absolute silence reigned. Even Nizu's teacup had stopped halfway to his mouth. Aizawa stared at the screen, his erasure quirk flaring subconsciously in his shock. He completely obliterated it. With one attack. And he didn't suffer a single millimeter of recoil damage. All Might gripped the armrest of his chair, his knuckles turning white. He had thought One for All was the pinnacle of raw power. But what he had just witnessed was something else entirely. It wasn't just strength. It was the wrath of a god, harnessed in the body of a 14-year-old boy. Down in the plaza, an older woman with a syringe walking cane hobbled out of the dust. Recovery Girl looked around the devastation, finally spotting Izuku and Uraraka. Goodness gracious, the elderly heroine muttered, walking up to them. She looked at Izuku, ready to scold him for breaking his body for a stunt. Young man, are you? She stopped. She looked him up and down. His breathing was even. His eyes were clear. Do you require medical assistance, applicant? Recovery Girl asked, baffled. Izuku shook his head politely. No, ma'am. I am operating at optimal capacity. However, she requires attention. He pointed to Uraraka's bruised leg. Recovery Girl planted a kiss on Uraraka's forehead, healing the bruise instantly at the cost of the girl's stamina. Uraraka slumped slightly, but Izuku caught her shoulder, steadying her. Thank you, Uraraka whispered, finally finding her voice. You saved my life. Izuku looked at her. He didn't smile, but his glowing green eyes softened slightly. It is what I was made for, Izuku replied simply. He turned and began walking back toward the entrance gates, leaving the ruined city and the stunned applicants behind him. How did I do, Aegis? Izuku asked internally, rolling his shoulders to work out a slight stiffness in his joints. Within the confines of his light, Aegis spun his shell rapidly, radiating absolute, unadulterated pride. You did perfectly, Guardian. The Vanguard would be proud. The week following the UA entrance exam was an exercise in patience that Izuku Midoriya found oddly difficult to navigate. Before his death, according to his mother and his notebooks, Izuku had been a bundle of nervous, kinetic energy, prone to muttering, pacing, and hyperventilating at the slightest provocation. The new Izuku, the Guardian, did not pace. He did not mutter. He sat on the floor of his bedroom, his legs crossed, his eyes closed, and he meditated. He spent hours delving into his own internal light, guided by the soothing, synthetic hum of Aegis. He visualized the arc energy not as a weapon, but as a current, an ocean of kinetic potential that he had to learn to swim in rather than just summon to strike. When the letter from UA finally arrived, Inko Midoriya nearly tore the envelope in half with her trembling hands. She slid a small, metallic disc onto the coffee table. A holographic projection flickered to life. The towering, muscular form of All Might appeared in the center of their living room, pointing dramatically at the camera. I am here as a projection. The symbol of peace boomed. Inko squeaked and grabbed Izuku's arm. Izuku merely watched, his glowing emerald eyes analyzing the projection's fidelity. All Might explained that he was taking a teaching position at UA. Then, the hero's tone shifted to something more solemn. He pulled up a scoreboard. Izuku saw his name at the top. 74 villain points. But that is not all. All Might continued, pressing a button. A video clip played, showing Izuku, wreathed in blinding blue lightning, rocketing through the air and obliterating the zero-pointer to save Ochako Uraraka. A hero course that rejects those who do the right thing is no hero course at all. Rescue points. Given by a panel of judges, Izuku Midoriya, for your selfless act of bravery, you are awarded 60 rescue points. A total of 134 points. An unprecedented score. All Might extended a hand toward the camera. Welcome, young Midoriya. This is your hero academia. The hologram faded. Inko burst into tears, wrapping her arms around Izuku's neck, sobbing about how proud she was, how his dream had finally come true. Izuku patted her back gently, his face an unreadable mask of calm. You don't seem excited, Aegis noted telepathically, materializing in the physical world to hover over Izuku's shoulder, invisible to Inko as long as Izuku willed his light to mask the ghost. I am satisfied with the tactical outcome, Izuku replied in his mind. But I am not here to be a celebrity, Aegis. This hero's society operates on a point system for saving lives. It treats combat like a spectator sport. It's highly inefficient. They haven't faced a true existential threat in centuries, Aegis reasoned. They fight criminals, not the darkness. You are a vanguard of one Izuku. For now you play by their rules so you can learn how this world operates. Understood. On the first morning of class, Izuku stood in front of the mirror in his bedroom, adjusting his UE uniform. He had discarded the standard red tie, finding it a choking hazard in close-quarters combat. Instead, he left the top button of his white shirt undone, his gray blazer tailored specifically to accommodate the dense, heavy musculature of his shoulders and chest. He looked at his own reflection. His eyes were the most jarring difference. They were green, yes, but they seemed to emit a faint, internal luminescence. The gaze looking back at him belonged to a soldier. Let's move out, Izuku said aloud, transmatting to your internal reserves. Aegis chirped, dissolving into a stream of blue data and light that sank into Izuku's chest. Navigating the massive, labyrinthine halls of UA High School was trivial. Izuku possessed perfect spatial recall. He arrived at the towering door marked 1A with 10 minutes to spare before the bell. He slid the massive door open. The classroom was already half full. At the front, the tall, blue-haired boy from the auditorium, Tenya Ida, was rigidly chastising Katsuki Bakugo for resting his boots on the desk. Remove your feet from that desk immediately. Ida chopped the air with his hand. It is disrespectful to the upperclassmen who sat there before us, and to the craftsmen who built it. Huh! Bakugo sneered, his red eyes narrowed in absolute contempt. What middle school are you from, you extra? I'll blow you to pieces. Izuku stepped into the room. The moment his heavy combat boots clicked against the linoleum, Bakugo's head snapped toward the door. The explosive boy froze. The arrogant sneer melted off his face, replaced by a tense, rigid scowl. His hands instinctively twitched, small sparks popping against his palms. Bakugo hadn't spoken a word to Izuku since the entrance exam, but the memory of Izuku's unyielding grip on his wrist still haunted him. Ida turned, spotting Izuku. He immediately marched over, his posture stiff. You! I am Tenya Ida from Semi-Private Academy. I must apologize for my behavior at the auditorium. You realize there was a practical reason for the zero-pointer, while I acted rashly. You are clearly a superior candidate. Izuku looked at Ida's extended hand. He reached out and shook it firmly. Izuku Midoriya. Apology accepted, Ida. You were operating on incomplete data. It happens. Oh. Midoriya. You're here. Izuku turned to see Achiko Uraraka standing in the doorway, beaming at him. I was hoping I'd get to talk to you. I wanted to say thank you again for saving me. The way you destroyed that giant robot. It was like a thunderbolt. It was so cool. Izuku offered a small, polite nod. You were pinned in a high-threat zone. Neutralizing the threat was the optimal maneuver. I'm glad you recovered. Uraraka blinked, her smile faltering slightly at his clinical, almost robotic response. Yeah? Optimal maneuver. Right. If you're just here to make friends, pack up your things and leave. The voice was tired, dry, and came from the floor. The students looked down to see a man wrapped entirely in a yellow sleeping bag, looking like a giant caterpillar, lying near the teacher's podium. He unzipped the bag and stood up, revealing a disheveled man in dark clothes with a scarf wrapped around his neck. I'm Shota Aizawa. I'll be your homeroom teacher, he said, his deadpan gaze sweeping over the room. It took you 8 seconds to quiet down. Time is a limited resource. You kids aren't rational enough. Aizawa pulled a set of blue and white tracksuits out of his sleeping bag. Put these on and head out to the PE grounds. Immediately. As the class scrambled to grab their uniforms, Aizawa's eyes lingered on Izuku. Aizawa had spent the last week reviewing the entrance exam footage. He had seen powerful quirks in his career as an underground pro hero. But Midoriya's power was a terrifying anomaly. The boy had exhibited high-tier marksmanship with an energy weapon, superhuman strength, enhanced durability, and finally, a localized cataclysm of electrical energy that wiped out a behemoth robot without breaking a single bone. On paper, Midoriya's quirk was listed as energy manipulation and physical enhancement, but Aizawa's instincts, honed by years of erasing quirks and fighting in the dark, screamed that something was fundamentally wrong with that classification. We'll see exactly what you are today, kid, Aizawa thought. The PE grounds were vast and bathed in the morning sun. Class 1A stood in their gym uniforms, shivering slightly in the cool air, listening to Aizawa explain the quirk apprehension test. A quirk apprehension test? Uraraka asked nervously. What about orientation? Or the entrance ceremony? If you're going to become heroes, you don't have time for leisurely events, Aizawa said coldly. UA is known for its unrestricted traditions. That means I run my class however I see fit. You've been taking standardized tests your whole lives with your quirks disabled. Today, we measure your true potential. Aizawa turned to Bakugo. Bakugo, you finished first in the practical exam among the normal applicants. What was your farthest softball throw in middle school? 67 meters, Bakugo grunted, glaring out of the corner of his eye at Izuku. Try it with your quirk. Aizawa tossed him a baseball. Bakugo stepped into the throwing circle. He stretched his arms, a feral grin returning to his face. Die! He roared, hurling the ball and detonating a massive explosion from his palms simultaneously. The ball rocketed into the sky, leaving a trail of black smoke. Aizawa held up a digital device. 705.2 meters. The class erupted into cheers. Over 700 meters? That's awesome! A boy with pink skin and horns yelled. This looks like fun! A girl with pink skin cheered. Aizawa's eyes narrowed, flashing a dangerous red. Fun? You have 3 years to become heroes. You think it's going to be games and playtime? His scarf levitated around his neck. Right. The one who ranks last in total points across all 8 tests will be judged as having no potential, and will be punished with expulsion. The class gasped in horror. Izuku didn't react. He crossed his arms over his chest. A psychological tactic, Aegis diagnosed in Izuku's mind. He is using the threat of immediate failure to artificially induce adrenaline and force them to operate at maximum capacity. It's effective but crude, Izuku replied internally. Fear is a poor substitute for discipline, Midoriya, Aizawa suddenly called out, locking eyes with Izuku. You're awfully quiet. You think expulsion is a joke? No, sir, Izuku said evenly, his voice carrying effortlessly over the nervous murmurs of the class. I think you are lying to extract optimal performance from an undisciplined unit, but whether you are lying or not is irrelevant to me. I will perform at my maximum capacity regardless of the stakes. Aizawa stared at the boy. The sheer, unflinching confidence was staggering. It wasn't the arrogance of Bakugo. It was the cold, undeniable certainty of a seasoned professional. Aizawa smirked slightly. Logical. Prove it. Test 1, the 50-meter dash. The tests began. Izuku treated every event with clinical precision. In the 50-meter dash, he was paired with Ida. Ida's engine legs fired up, ready to sprint. Izuku simply crouched. He didn't summon the massive, destructive storm of the thunder crash. Instead, he coated his boots in a thin, hyperdense layer of arc light. The robot signaled the start. Boom! Izuku broke the sound barrier in a single step. The asphalt at the starting line shattered into dust. He crossed the 50-meter finish line before Ida had taken his third step. 1.12 seconds, the robotic voice announced. In the grip strength test, a multi-armed boy named Shoji proudly scored 540 kilograms. Izuku picked up the machine. He channeled his light into his muscles, increasing their density to rival titanium. He squeezed. The digital counter spun frantically, hitting 999 kilograms before the metal handle simply crushed inward, snapping the internal springs and completely destroying the device. Izuku handed the sparking, broken machine to a stunned Aizawa. Apologies. I exceeded the structural tolerance. Aizawa just stared at the ruined metal in his hand. Then came the ball throw. Uraraka went just before Izuku, scoring an infinity by removing the ball's gravity. Midoriya. You're up, Aizawa called out. Izuku stepped into the circle. He held the baseball in his hand, feeling the seams. How far do you want it to go, Guardian? Aegis asked. Arc for kinetic velocity? Or solar for thrust? Let's test solar, Izuku decided. I need to practice shaping the flame. Aizawa watched Izuku intensely. He pulled down his goggles. This kid is too composed. His physical strength is absurd. but the entrance exam showed he has an energy emission aspect to his quirk. Let's see how you do without your crutch, kid. Aizawa's eyes snapped open. His irises glowed a piercing red, and his hair levitated into the air. He activated his quirk, Erasure. Erasure worked by targeting the quirk factor, the biological organ or genetic mutation responsible for a person's superhuman abilities. By temporarily suppressing that biological function, the quirk was rendered inert. Izuku wound his arm back. Aizawa kept his unblinking gaze locked on Izuku. I've got you. Let's see your baseline strength. Izuku channeled the light. He reached past the crackling storm of arc and found the burning, incandescent heart of solar energy. Deep within Izuku, there was no biological quirk factor. There was no mutated gene. There was only the light, a power-causal force gifted by a dormant god. It didn't belong to the laws of physics or biology. It belonged to the universe. Aizawa's erasure hit Izuku, and found absolutely nothing to erase. Izuku threw the ball. As his arm whipped forward, a localized sun flared to life in his palm. A massive, roaring pillar of golden-orange solar fire erupted from his hand, enveloping the baseball. The sheer heat vaporized the moisture in the air instantly, creating a shockwave of steam. The ball shot into the sky, leaving a trail of divine fire so bright it hurt the eyes of the students watching. It broke the sound barrier, ascending at an impossible angle until it vanished from sight entirely, burning like a shooting star in the daylight. Aizawa staggered back, dropping his erasure. His eyes widened in absolute shock. He felt a sudden, terrifying chill run down his spine. His quirk hadn't worked. He had felt it. It was like trying to put out a forest fire by turning off a light switch in a completely different building. There was no connection. The digital device in Aizawa's hand beeped. 3,105.4 meters. Izuku lowered his smoking hand, the golden flames dissolving into harmless motes of light that faded into the air. He turned to walk back to the group. Stop right there, Aizawa commanded, his voice tight, lacking its usual deadpan drawl. Izuku paused. Aizawa marched up to him, his scarf floating defensively. What did you just do? I threw the ball, Izuku replied calmly. Don't play games with me, Midoriya, Aizawa hissed, stepping closer, lowering his voice so the rest of the class couldn't hear. I looked right at you. I activated my quirk. I erase quirks. But yours, it didn't shut down. It didn't even stutter. Aizawa glared into Izuku's glowing green eyes. What are you hiding? Izuku held Aizawa's gaze. He evaluated the teacher. Aizawa was a pragmatist. A logical operator. Lying to him about a late-blooming quirk wouldn't work. The man's own ability had just proved that Izuku's biology was perfectly normal. Aegis, Izuku thought. We have a security breach. We need to brief the commander. Agreed. He is trustworthy, though highly suspicious, Aegis replied. Suddenly, a localized distortion in space occurred right next to Izuku's shoulder. With a soft shwip sound and a pulse of white light, a small, floating mechanical eye materialized in the air between Izuku and Aizawa. Aizawa instinctively jumped back, dropping into a combat stance, his scarf lashing out like a snake. Whoa, easy there! Aegis's synthetic, cheerful voice echoed from the metal shell as its segments spun. We come in peace, Eraserhead, the entire class gasped, taking a collective step back. What the hell is that? Bakugo yelled. Aizawa stared at the floating machine. Is this part of your quirk, Midoriya? A sentient construct? No, Izuku said, his voice flat. He looked at Aizawa, deciding to drop the charade for the one man who could see through it. My medical files state I had a late quirk awakening. That is a fabricated cover story to prevent mass panic and government intervention. Aizawa's eyes narrowed dangerously. Explain. Your quirk targets biological mutations, Aizawa-sensei. It failed on me because I do not possess a quirk factor. Biologically speaking, I am completely, 100% quirkless. A heavy silence fell over the courtyard. That's impossible, Aizawa said flatly. I just saw you throw a baseball 3 kilometers with fire. It isn't a quirk, Izuku explained, his tone clinical, as if lecturing on basic arithmetic. It is paracausality. A fundamental force that supersedes the laws of physics, thermodynamics, and biology. I wield the light. And this, he gestured to the floating ghost, is Aegis. He is the conduit that allows me to channel it. Aegis bobbed in the air. It's a pleasure to meet you, sir. Though I'd appreciate it if you stopped trying to erase my guardian's abilities. It tickles. Aizawa felt a headache building behind his eyes. He looked at the boy. Midoriya wasn't lying. The absolute lack of deceit in his posture was terrifying. He was dealing with something completely outside the bounds of human science. Aizawa took a deep breath, rubbed his temples, and let his scarf drop. Fine. We will discuss this paracausality in Principal Nise's office later. For now, get back in line. The test isn't over. Izuku nodded respectfully. Aegis dissolved back into a stream of light, sinking into Izuku's chest. Izuku walked back to the group. Bakugo was shaking. His hands were smoking. Quirkless? He just said he's quirkless? What the hell is this paracausality bullshit? He's mocking me. When the test concluded, Aizawa projected the scores. 1. Izuku Midoriya. 2. Momo Yaoyorozu. 3. Shoto Todoroki. 4. Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo stared at the holographic projection, his teeth grinding together so hard they threatened to crack. He was fourth. And the nerd who used to cry when he was pushed down was at the very top, looking completely bored. By the way, I lied about the expulsion, Aizawa said, a creepy grin stretching across his face. It was a rational deception to draw out the upper limits of your quirks. The class erupted in shock and relief. Izuku merely sighed. As expected. Highly inefficient. The next day brought the true test of UA's curriculum, Hero Basic Training. I am coming through the door like a normal person. All Might smashed through the classroom door, striking a bizarre pose. The class erupted into fanatical cheers. Izuku simply watched, analyzing the pro-hero's massive physique. Incredible muscular density, but his posture favors his right side. He is protecting an injury. Izuku noted. Keen-eye guardian, Aegis praised. But let's focus on the mission. Today, we will be conducting battle trials. All Might announced, pointing a remote at the wall. Panels slid open, revealing numbered suitcases. And you will be doing it in your hero costumes. 10 minutes later, Class 1A walked out of the tunnel into Ground Beta. The costumes were a riot of color and impractical designs. Capes, bright spandex, high heels. Izuku stepped out of the tunnel, and the murmuring of the class died down. He didn't look like a superhero. He looked like a futuristic super soldier. He wore a set of tactical Titan armor, meticulously crafted by support companies based on Aegis's blueprints. The base layer was a dark, woven mesh designed for thermoregulation. Over it sat heavy, matte green plasteel plating that covered his chest, shoulders, forearms, and shins. The armor was scratched and scuffed, given a weathered look by design, symbolizing a warrior who had seen battle. Around his waist was a heavy utility belt, and draped over his right hip was a Titan mark, a long, dark green cloth woven with silver threads, bearing the Vanguard insignia. He wore no helmet. His glowing emerald eyes were intimidation enough. Midoriya! Uraraka jogged over, wearing a very tight pink and black suit. Your costume looks so heavy. Can you even move in that? Izuku flexed his gauntlet, the plasteel shifting smoothly over his joints. It's functionally weightless to me. It provides optimal kinetic absorption and environmental protection. All Might looked at Izuku. The hero felt a shiver run down his spine. The boy looked like an instrument of war. Young Midoriya, you truly have changed. All right, listen up. All Might boomed. The setup is simple. 2-on-2 indoor combat. The villains have a nuclear weapon hidden in the building. The heroes must either capture the villains or secure the weapon within the time limit. Lots were drawn. Izuku looked at his ball. Team A. He looked over at Uraraka. She held up her ball, grinning. We're a team, Midoriya. Izuku nodded. Excellent. We have good synergy. And Team A will be facing. All Might drew 2 balls from the villain box. Team D. Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida. Izuku's gaze snapped across the group, locking onto Bakugo. Bakugo was vibrating with rage. His costume featured massive, grenade-shaped gauntlets on his forearms. When he realized he was fighting Izuku, a feral, bloodthirsty grin split his face. "I'm going to kill you, Deku," Bakugo's eyes promised. "I'm going to expose you for the fraud you are." Izuku stared back, his expression entirely blank. "He is emotionally compromised," Aegis noted. "He will attack immediately, disregarding the objective." "I know," Izuku replied. "I will draw his aggro. He needs to learn his place in the vanguard." 5 minutes later, Izuku and Uraraka stood outside the massive, faux concrete building. "Okay, so what's the plan?" Uraraka asked, bouncing on her heels nervously. "Bakugo seems really angry at you. And Ida is super fast. Should we sneak in?" Izuku analyzed the blueprints of the building provided on his gauntlet's holographic display. "Bakugo will not play defense," Izuku stated, his voice commanding and authoritative. "His psychological profile is heavily skewed toward aggressive dominance. He will abandon the payload and seek me out immediately to prove superiority. Ida is rigidly bound by rules. He will stay behind to guard the weapon on the top floor." Uraraka blinked. "Psychological profile? You sound like a general." "I am a guardian." "This is a vanguard strike," Izuku said, turning to face her. "Here is the operational directive. I will enter through a ground floor window and make noise. Bakugo will rush me. I will engage and incapacitate him. While I hold his attention, you will enter through the fire escape on the north side, use your quirk to ascend the exterior, and infiltrate the top floor from a window. Secure the weapon while Ida is isolated." Uraraka saluted nervously. "Why, yes, sir. Timer starts now." All Might's voice crackled over their earpieces. Izuku didn't waste a second. He marched up to a barred window on the first floor. He didn't look for a door. He grabbed the steel bars, channeled a fraction of arc light into his muscles, and casually ripped the bars out of the concrete, tossing them aside. He stepped through the shattered glass into the dark corridors of the building. He walked down the center of the hallway. He didn't try to hide his footsteps. The heavy clank of his armored boots echoed ominously through the silent building. He reached an intersection. "Incoming! Above and to the right!" Aegis warned instantly. Izuku stopped. From around the corner, Katsuki Bakugo vaulted into the hallway, using an explosion from his left hand to propel himself forward at blistering speed. He reeled his right arm back, aiming a devastating hook directly at Izuku's face. "Die, DKU!" Bakugo screamed, triggering a massive, blinding explosion. Flames and shockwaves completely engulfed the hallway. The walls cracked, and dust rained from the ceiling. In the observation room, the class gasped. "A surprise attack!" Mina Ashido yelled. "That's so cheap. A battle can start at any moment," Aizawa muttered from his sleeping bag in the corner. "Watch closely." The smoke in the hallway cleared. Bakugo landed, a savage grin on his face. "That'll teach you to look down on." His voice died in his throat. Standing perfectly still in the center of the blast radius was Izuku. His armor wasn't even scorched. He hadn't dodged. He hadn't blocked. In front of Izuku stood a massive, towering wall of shimmering, violet energy. It was a towering barricade, summoned from the void. The hard light shield had completely absorbed the kinetic and thermal energy of Bakugo's explosion, converting it into harmless static. Izuku looked through the purple glass of the barricade, staring at Bakugo with cold, glowing emerald eyes. "You are acting on emotion," Izuku said, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "It makes you entirely predictable." Bakugo's eyes widened, then narrowed into slits of pure, unadulterated fury. "What the hell is this trick? You think a fancy shield makes you better than me? I'll tear it down." Bakugo lunged forward, unleashing a rapid-fire barrage of explosions against the barricade. Boom! 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 The hallway shook violently. In the observation room, All Might gripped the microphone. "Young Bakugo, indoor use of those explosions is dangerous. You will compromise the structural integrity." Bakugo ignored him. He was lost to the rage. He planted his feet, gripping the pin on his right grenade gauntlet. "If you don't dodge this, you'll die," he roared, pulling the pin. A colossal blast of condensed, weaponized fire roared down the hallway like a dragon's breath, threatening to incinerate everything in its path. Izuku didn't flinch. He dropped the void barricade. As the inferno rushed toward him, Izuku channeled the storm. Blue lightning erupted from his armor. He stepped forward, leaning into the blast. He raised his right arm, coating it in a dense, swirling vortex of arc energy. He punched into the explosion. The kinetic force of Izuku's punch met the thermal expansion of Bakugo's blast. The resulting shockwave tore the hallway apart, blowing out all the windows on the floor. When the dust settled, Bakugo was panting, his arms smoking. He looked through the haze. Izuku was walking toward him. The flames seemed to part around his armored form, repelled by the crackling arc shield surrounding his body. You rely too much on your quirk's raw output, Izuku stated calmly, closing the distance with terrifying speed. You have no martial discipline. You leave yourself wide open. Bakugo screamed, throwing a wild right hook aimed at Izuku's head. Izuku didn't block. He slipped inside Bakugo's guard with the grace of a seasoned boxer. He grabbed Bakugo's right wrist with his left hand, locking it in a vice grip of plasteel and light. With his right hand, Izuku delivered a devastating palm strike to Bakugo's chest. Frontal assault. The strike was infused with arc energy. It hit Bakugo with the force of a battering ram, while simultaneously sending a localized EMP shock through his nervous system. Bakugo gasped, the breath violently expelled from his lungs. His vision blurred, and his legs turned to jelly. The arc charge scrambled his motor functions, making it impossible for him to ignite his sweat. Izuku didn't stop. He seamlessly twisted Bakugo's arm behind his back, sweeping his leg to knock the explosive boy to the ground. He drove his armored knee into the center of Bakugo's back, pinning him to the cracked linoleum floor. Izuku pulled a strip of capture tape from his belt and quickly bound Bakugo's wrists together. The fight had lasted less than 45 seconds. Bakugo lay on the ground, gasping for air, his muscles twitching from the residual electrical charge. He turned his head, his crimson eyes welling with tears of absolute, crushing defeat. He had used his strongest attack, and Deku hadn't even broken a sweat. He had dismantled him like he was a child throwing a tantrum. Why? Bakugo choked out, coughing. How? Izuku looked down at the boy who had tormented him for a decade. He felt no anger. No vindication. Just the weary responsibility of a guardian correcting a misdirected ally. Because you fight to prove you are the strongest, Izuku said softly, his voice devoid of malice. I fight to ensure that people like you survive to see tomorrow. One motivation has a ceiling, the other does not. Izuku stood up, tapping his earpiece. Uraraka. Target 1 incapacitated and secured. What is your status? I'm at the weapon room. Uraraka's voice came through, panting slightly. Ida has removed all the objects in the room so I can't use them as projectiles. And he's running around so fast I can't touch him. Understood, Izuku said. Maintain your position. I am en route to provide heavy support. Izuku turned his back on the bound, trembling Bakugo and began walking toward the stairwell, his boots echoing heavily in the silent hallway. In the observation room, Class 1A was dead silent. Kirishima, a boy with red hair and shark-like teeth, swallowed hard. That wasn't a fight. That was an execution. Midoriya, he didn't even look angry. He just handled him. Todoroki Shoto, standing in the back of the room with half his body covered in ice, stared at the screen intently. His mismatched eyes analyzed Midoriya's movements. No wasted energy, flawless tactical execution. And that purple shield, it was different from the lightning. Just how many abilities does he have? All Might held the microphone, his hands shaking slightly. He was proud of young Midoriya's growth, but the cold, military efficiency terrified him. He fights like a soldier who has been at war for 20 years. Where did you go, Izuku? What did you become? Up on the 5th floor, Ida was pacing around the papier-mâché nuclear weapon, his engines idling. He had completely cleared the room to counter Uraraka's quirk. He was playing the villain role perfectly. Uraraka peeked around the doorframe, looking distressed. Suddenly, the floor beneath Ida began to rumble. Ida stopped. What is that vibration? An earthquake? Crash! The concrete floor directly beneath the nuclear weapon violently exploded upward. A fountain of debris, dust, and crackling blue lightning erupted into the room. Izuku burst through the floor from the level below, propelled by an arc-infused leap. He landed softly next to the weapon, his heavy boots settling onto the linoleum. He reached out and placed a gauntlet hand on the papier-mâché bomb. He looked over at a completely stunned Ida, the dust settling around his armored form. Payload secured, Izuku announced calmly. Hero team wins. All Might's voice blared over the speakers, breaking the stunned silence of the entire facility. Uraraka cheered, running into the room and high-fiving Izuku's armored shoulder. Ida slumped in defeat, pushing his glasses up his nose. Incredible. You bypassed my defenses entirely by destroying the floor from below. I failed to account for a vertical infiltration. You played your role well, Ida, Izuku said, offering a small nod of respect. But a static defense is a dead defense. Always maintain mobility. When the 4 students returned to the observation room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Bakugo was staring at the floor, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, vibrating with silent, humiliating rage. Well done, everyone. All Might forced a cheerful tone. Now, who can tell me who the MVP of this match was? Momo Yaoyorozu raised her hand. It was Midoriya. Without a doubt. And why is that, young Yaoyorozu? Because he was the only one who treated this like a real combat scenario, Momo explained analytically. Bakugo acted purely on personal vendetta, ignoring the objective and causing massive structural damage. Ida formed a solid defense but failed to anticipate unconventional tactics. Uraraka hesitated and allowed Ida to control the engagement. She looked at Izuku. Midoriya formulated a plan, utilized psychological manipulation to draw the most dangerous threat away from the objective, neutralized that threat cleanly without excessive force, and then provided a tactical extraction of the objective. It was flawless. All Might nodded slowly. Excellent analysis. Young Midoriya, your tactical prowess is exceptional. However, breaking through the floor caused significant property damage. In a real-world hostage or bomb defusal scenario, structural damage is preferable to a detonation, Izuku replied evenly, looking All Might directly in the eye. My priority was securing the objective before the hostile could adapt. Cost of repairs is a secondary concern to the preservation of life. All Might couldn't argue with that logic. Very well. Let us move on to the next match. As the class turned their attention back to the screens, Izuku stepped back into the shadows of the room. He crossed his arms, his internal light humming in a state of deep satisfaction. First strike operation successful, Aegis. Izuku noted in his mind. Indeed, Guardian, the ghost replied warmly. You have established your presence. You have humbled the aggressive element. You are building your vanguard. Izuku looked around the room. He saw Uraraka smiling at him. He saw Ida watching him with deep respect. He saw Todoroki glaring at him with intense rivalry. He saw Bakugo shaking with a newfound, terrifying realization that he was no longer the apex predator of their small world. Izuku closed his eyes. The memory of his death was still gone, but as he stood among these strange, passionate people with their biological quirks and their bright costumes, he felt something ancient and profound settle in his chest. He didn't know who he used to be, but he knew exactly who he was now. He was the shield of this world. And he would not break.